Hello, South Africa. My name is Frantz. I'm really excited to be joining you on this amazing event. A round of applause for all the amazing organizers that have set up all these pieces together, including people online accommodating the different problems that they face. Thank you so much for this amazing event. And today I'm going to be talking to you about inaccessibility in websites and why there is a ton that you could be doing to remedy the situation and exactly what you can start doing today. So, what's accessibility? Before we get into the talk itself, please visit this link on your mobile devices or on your laptops and you would be able to get my slides because it includes code samples and it might not be very visible from where you are. So it would be really handy to have it on hand. So I would give you 3 seconds to just go to katifrantz.com/gdg-sa. Okay, so what's accessibility? That's the first question we need to answer. And please show of hands, how many people really pay attention when building websites for accessibility? Okay, I'm just gonna assume that there's a ton of people that raise their hands, and I'm just gonna give you a broad definition of what it means. It means building for everyone, caring about everyone. When you're building your website, you need to have in mind that there's a range of people with different irregularities or different disabilities that are going to use your website. So, what's the meaning of everyone? Who is everyone? What does this mean? What does it mean to care for everyone or build for everyone when building your websites? Now, everyone is Susan, who is using a screen reader because she's visually impaired. So there's someone on the internet somewhere using a screen reader to understand your website and not her eyes. There's John using the keyboard because he's motor impaired. There's Michael browsing the internet on an extremely slow 3G connection because he is living in a third world country or a development country, or maybe he is just remotely in a desert somewhere where the internet connection is not that strong. There's also Mary struggling to read your site because she has a low vision. So the whole point of accessibility is building with all of these amazing people in mind. So the consciousness of building for everyone is what we're here to talk about today. And what we are going to do very simply is to go through each of these examples and show you what you could be doing every single day on your website, the really tiniest changes that are going to make a huge difference in someone's life somewhere. So we'll start with Susan and the screen reader she uses, then we would go to John and the keyboard that he uses, then Michael, and finally Mary. So we are building for Susan. And I'm going to show you about 2 or 3 things that you can do to help screen readers out there that are helping other people understand your website. So when you're building your website, this is the very first example, the most basic of examples. You are creating an image and you're including the image. So what you shouldn't do is just include the source of the image. For example, if you can see my code right now, it says the source of the image is just cover image1.png, and that's it. Now, this is very good for users that are not visually impaired or do not have low vision because they would be able to see the image and understand it and process it. But that's just not all the users that we have. We have Susan, and Susan is not able to see the image. So does that mean Susan should have a really poor experience browsing our website? No, that's not the case. So what should we do instead? Just include an alt tag. Just put a description of the image. For example, in the do system, you can see we have an alternative text that says, man walking with his dog on the beach. And now when the screen reader is going through your website, it's going to read out loud an image of a man walking with his dog on the beach. And now Susan has a mental picture of what you're trying to convey on your website. So accessible images, really huge change that you can make in your code, and it's just a tiny change, but it's going to make a world of a difference for someone. Now, the second tip I have for you is using semantic HTML. So the screen reader is going through Susan's website and trying to understand exactly you as the developer, what you're trying to get her to do. Here's an example of a form. I think how many of you have used React or JavaScript before? You don't need to use a regular form to be able to submit data to the user, to your server, for example. You can see we have a div here with a login container, then we have a form group, and this form group has a username and an input, and then it has a button with a class of submit button. And you can just use JavaScript to get this input value and then submit it using an AJAX request or a JSON API request. Now, this is what you shouldn't do. Why? Because the screen reader doesn't understand what this means. And now there's a problem because Susan doesn't understand that this is actually a login form. And I see this so many times with developers. And it's convenient because you don't really have to worry about the semantics. But the semantics are what helps screen readers understand what you're trying to convey to your user. So what should you do instead? Use a form. It's a form, so use the form element. And if you use the form element, when the screen reader gets to this form, it would inform Susan that this is a form. And the next thing you can use is a field set. So if you have a form with different groups, you can create a field set. And this field set is going to tell Susan, okay, you are editing the settings section of your profile, or you are editing the address section of your profile, and this is just going to give a ton of context to the screen reader, and Susan gets a much better experience. In your field set, use a legend, and that legend is going to describe exactly what that form is supposed to do. And then very importantly, notice that the label has a for attribute, and the for is equal to username, and the ID of the input is username. So in this case, we are linking the input to the label. And now the screen reader would understand that this username is describing this input, and Susan would know exactly what to type into that field or dictate into that field. Okay? So this tiny change, also the last change in this form, you can see the type of the button is set to submit, and it's going to automatically submit that form. Okay? So these are very tiny changes, and the semantic HTML goes a long way. It's not just the form. You can do semantic headers, semantic navigation on other lists instead of just using divs, and it's going to help the screen reader a ton. Okay? One final trick I think I have for Susan when you're using screen readers is area labels. Now, an area label is meant to give the screen reader a little more description on what you're trying to convey, especially when the browser does not really support what you're trying to do. In this case, you can see that I have a hamburger button, and I think if you use like a mobile phone where the hamburger button helps you open the menu, in this case, I have a hamburger icon. In this case, I have a hamburger icon and an on-click handler, and this is okay because a user who is not visually impaired would be able to see the button and click on it. But what you should do instead is provide an area label, because a user that is visually impaired like Susan wouldn't be able to see the hamburger button and understand that, oh, this is for a mobile device. So what you would do is add an area label to the button, and when the screen reader gets there, it would see that this button has a label called close menu, and it would read it out loud to Susan, and Susan would understand that if I click on this button, it's going to close the button. And that makes so much sense, makes the experience much better, and gives a ton more context and makes things really easy. Now, there's a ton of things that you can pay attention to when using screen readers, but I hope this has given you an introduction to what you should pay attention to when writing your HTML so that it provides a much better experience for screen reader users. Okay, so let's go to John. John is keyboard users. So John is, we want to build for John, and John is very accustomed to using his keyboard because he has a motor disability. So what should you pay attention to? I'll just give you about 2 tips here so that you should have that in mind as a mental model. So the first one we have here is the focus of an element. I see this so many times. Developers are creating a website and they say the input focus should be outline known, and that's why, because the output border of the button is really ugly. And I can relate to this. I think when I started as a developer, everything I did was just completely turn off the the element focus because it wasn't really beautiful. But there's a better way. What you can do is, instead of removing the outline, you should rather modify the focus outline. So you can do something like thick double red if that's the style you want, or you can style it to look as beautiful as you want. Now, why is this important? Because a user is navigating your website not using a pointer, a mouse. So if they're using a mouse, they can know exactly where they're clicking. But if they're using a keyboard, they are using the tab key and going from one item to the next, and having the visual notification there that they are on the focused element that they want to be at is a visual confirmation. So you want to make sure you have that. So don't remove it, because now you are disrupting a whole range of users out there that are going to have a poor experience. Okay, so let's talk about the tab order, what you shouldn't do and what you should do. So on the left, you can see a really beautiful image of a custom select designed by the designer on a team. And on the right, you can see the developer implementation of this select. So the developer created a container or a div of select container and a label and then select items. And these are all divs. And this is okay because there is no direct immediately support. There's no direct browser support for the select that we have on the left. So this is okay, but then visual users, when you've styled this with CSS, would understand that it's a select. But not all users are visual users. What about the keyboard users? They need to be able to understand when they are going through the select, it should be able to go through the options because they do not have a mouse, or they cannot use a mouse to point and click. So what you should do instead is use this thing we call tab order. And what would tab order do? It would say tab index equals 0. And when the user is going through your website with the tab key, it's going to focus on that div. And now with the tab index equals 0 on the select items, when the user presses tab again, it would go through the items of the select. Now this is a very tiny change, but basically you're including a div, which is a box, into the normal flow. If the user was going through with tab, it wouldn't focus on the div because it's just a box of information. But now that you've added the tab index, it's going to be included. So this is very, very helpful for keyboard users because now they can navigate the select, the custom select that you created. Now just imagine if a user is trying to log in and they cannot select because they're using a keyboard, and now their entire experience is ruined. But if you have the tab index and you also have the JavaScript implementation to select, deselect, or remove or add items to the select list, that's just an amazing experience. Okay, so these are the things that you should be worried about. Now let's talk about Michael, who is on a slow 3G connection. And for Michael, it's mainly about web performance. Now, what can you do as a developer to make sure that if someone is in the desert, very far away from internet, and is trying to use your use your website to send a message back home to ask for help, or if they're stranded somewhere out there and they have the slowest connection ever, how do you make sure that Michael can actually contact his family and return home safely? So it's just a bunch of things that you have to take care of, and this actually require no effort from you. It's so amazing that a lot of platforms are making this very easy. I remember in 2013 when we started, web performance was really difficult. For example, when you want to make your website performant, these are the things you would have to take care of. Number one, all of the media, you would reduce their sizes. You would make sure that they are very, very performant. For example, a 1 megabyte image is very slow to load on the website, but a 16 kilobyte image is much faster. Okay, so you would also implement web workers to cache your assets. So for example, if a user is visiting a website a second time, you wouldn't want to reload that image. What you would want is for your browser to have a copy of that image and just reuse it instead of reloading it again, and the website would load much faster. So we also have the global content delivery networks. So this would be servers from all over the world that would get the assets to your user based on the closest server. Okay, So there's a ton of them. There's Amazon, there's Google CDNs, and basically if a user is in Africa, it would use the Africa server to load their image instead of trying to load it from India, which is a much farther server and will take much more bandwidth and more time. So also minify your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript assets. So if you have a JavaScript file that is 10 kilobytes, you can minify this to 2 kilobytes and it would load much faster. So all of these things that I mentioned that you can do for web performance, you can just use the right hosting provider like Netlify or Vercel, and it would just take care of all of this for you. So Netlify is going to bundle your assets, it's going to minify your images, it's going to deploy your assets to a content delivery network. It's also going to cache your assets for you on the CDN and on the user's computer. Vercel will do the exact same thing and you don't have to worry. So just the decision of where to deploy your application can extremely make a huge difference in someone else's life. Okay, so let's take the last one, which is Mary, who has a low vision. And I'll be giving you 2 examples here and why it's important. So not everybody can see as clear as you do if you see very clearly. And it's totally okay. The point is having enough empathy to be able to build for people with low vision. So let's see this example, for example, and this is an actual screenshot of a website that I took. So on the left, we have a green button that says apply now. And if you look very closely, I hope you have like my slides on your mobile phone so you can look very closely. You will see there's something called accessibility. And under there, we have the first item, which is contrast. Now it says 2.32 and there is a sign, a yellow notification sign, which is a warning. Now the contrast is, I would say, the difference between the background and the foreground. Now with people with low vision, this difference might be very hard to pick up. So if you had white text on the white background, the contrast is 0. So you wouldn't be able to see anything. And this is applicable to everybody. But now if you have a very low contrast, with people with low vision would have very high difficulty seeing this. So you don't want to do this. What you want to do instead is use a higher contrast. So a black color and a white background, or a white background and a black color. And what this is going to do is give you a confirmation on the right. You can see what you should do instead. The contrast is 21. And this is really good because you have the confirmation that no matter the low vision, the people that are affected by this are going to be able to see the message that you're trying to convey to them. So you want to be very conscious about your color contrast. And also your font readability. I am very guilty of this too. When I started my YouTube channel back in 2017, I think I made a mistake by using the font on the left. I picked this font specifically because I have used it in one of my videos, and the comment section was just full of people saying, I'm sorry, I can't see what you're doing. I can't see what you're doing. And that's the very first time empathy really hit me, right? Because I was like, I really want to do good, but then I didn't make this accessible enough for people who are like me. I can see it clearly, but that does not mean I should take away from the experience of those that cannot. And you can see on the right, we have a better font. It's the Roboto font. It's much simpler, and a vast majority of people would be able to consume this font. So you want to make decisions based on the people that will consume your website and not based on your personal preferences, or not make your personal preferences or a larger majority of the users have the decision power and then ignore the others, okay? So thank you so much for your time. In this talk, I've given you some tips on how to immediately improve your accessibility just by making very tiny decisions in your code. For example, deploy to Vercel and Netlify, and it will make your website much more performant. Another example is making sure that you have the correct area label if you have a hamburger button, or if you have an icon on your website that says hide and show password. All of these tiny things can make life really easy for another person. So thank you so much for your time. I am really, really excited to be talking to you, and I really hope you can go through my slides, get some tips there to make your accessibility journey a better one. So my name is Frantz, and you can go to catfrantz.com/overschool. I'm setting up a kind of system where I can talk more about accessibility with developers and educate as much as I can. So if you're interested, please sign up for free. You're going to be receiving emails from me where I educate you about accessibility, performance, a ton of stuff in the developer community. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here. I've been Frantz, and I hope you have an amazing rest of the conference.